Okay, I'm back with more Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom. I'm gonna read 4 chapters. So sit down, buckle up, and be ready. I got something on my screen there. All right, chapter 17, the best principal ever. Mrs. Jules went from desk to desk, handing back everyone's history homework. Nice job, Eric, she said to one of the Erics. Well done, Eric, she said to another. You better study the history of cabbage, she told the third Eric. The ultimate test is coming. The third Eric, naturally, was Eric Ovens. He thought he knew all about the history of cabbage and felt bad when he saw his homework grade. Then he realized that Mrs. Jules had given him Eric Bacon's paper by mistake. It turned out Eric Bacon had Eric Fry's homework and Eric Fry had his. They switched papers. Mrs. Jules moved on. Nice job, Dee Dee, although your paper smelled somewhat strange. She stopped at Jason's desk and shook her head. I was very disappointed, Jason. Sorry, Jason muttered. He could barely hold his head up. I was up all night reading. He'll never finish his book, Mrs. Jules said Allison. Suddenly the classroom door swung open and banged against the wall. Everyone turned to see Mr. Kidswatter. Good morning, children, he said. They stared at him. He had never been inside their classroom before. Mr. Kidswatter loudly cleared his throat. I said, good morning, children. Mrs. Jules hurried to the front of the room. She waved her hands like an orchestra conductor. Good morning, Mr. Kidswatter, the children said in unison. The principal smiled. What's all this? He asked, pointing to the 27 plastic containers stacked against the wall. Toenails, said Paul. Also fingernails, added Leslie, so the principal wouldn't think the class was weird. Well, I'm glad to see you're doing important work here, said Mr. Kidswatter. Would you like to donate a toenail or maybe a fingernail? Asked Mrs. Jules. Mr. Kidswatter curled his fingers as he examined his nails. No, I'm still using mine. Anyway, that's not why I'm here. I'm looking for a student to bang the gong on Friday. I figured I'd start at the top and work my way down until I found someone willing to. Every arm shot up in the air. Calls of pick me and ooh, ooh could be heard from around the room. Oh, said Mr. Kidswatter, I guess it won't take as long as I thought. Me, begged Bebe, stretching her arm high. No, me, urged Dee Dee. It was impossible to know where Mr. Kidswatter was looking. He wore mirrored sunglasses, even indoors. Okay, here's a picture of him. I've never seen him before. There he is. I thought he was like a scrawny little guy, but he's a big burly guy, isn't he? I like his glasses. All right. Joy had both hands raised, doubling her chances of being picked. You're the best principal ever, she called out. Mr. Kidswatter's head turned. You, he boomed, pointing his finger. Everybody groaned, except for the one person he had chosen. Me? Stephen asked meekly. You, asked Mr. Kidswatter, sounding somewhat surprised. Yes, you, he declared. I chose you, didn't I? And I don't make mistakes. He strode towards Stephen, then placed his big hands on both sides of Stephen's desk and leaned over. Be in my office on Friday at 2 minutes before 3 o'clock, he ordered. You will get one and only one swing of the mallet, so you better not miss. You must hit the very center of the gong at exactly 3 o'clock. Not a second early, not a second late. There are no second chances. Stephen's right leg was shaking. The principal straightened up and headed toward the door. Goodbye, children, he said. He stopped. He waited. He folded his arms across his chest. Mrs. Jules waved her hands like an orchestra conductor. Goodbye, Mr. Kidswatter, everyone said together. As soon as the principal was gone, everyone crowded around Stephen's desk. You are so lucky, said Jason. This is the best thing that has ever happened to anyone in our class, said Jenny. You better not blow it, said Joy, or else no kid will ever get to ring the gong again. Do you even lift the mallet? Asked Terrence. Stephen didn't say anything. He hadn't heard a word they said. It was as if the moment Mr. Kidswatter had said, you, someone had banged a gong inside Stephen's head. Gong. Chapter 18, The Mirror. Dr. Pickle kept 2 things on his desk. One was a bust of Sigmund Freud. There it is. Sigmund Freud. A bust is a statue of someone's head, neck, and shoulders. Sigmund Freud was the most famous psychologist ever. He was Dr. Pickle's hero. Dr. Freud also had a beard. The second thing on Dr. Pickle's desk was a handheld mirror. Dr. Pickle checked his beard at least 5 times per day to make sure it was trimmed just right. Now, however, that was the least of his worries. He looked at his face in the mirror. His cheek was puffed out. His tongue was sticking out, one eye was closed, one eyebrow was raised. He looked like a big doofus. He gently swung his pickle stone between his face and the mirror. I am getting sleepy, he said to himself. By the count of 5, I will fall asleep. 1, 2, thruple-dub. His head plopped down on his desk. This would normally be the time when Dr. Pickle would tell his patient that she was supposed to do what she was supposed to do when she woke up. But he was his own patient, and both patient and doctor were sleeping. Sometime later, a car horn blared. It sounded like there was an angry driver right behind him. Dr. Pickle woke up. He had no idea how long he'd been sleeping. It took him a moment to remember who he was, where he was, and why he had tried to hypnotize himself. He picked up the mirror and checked his face. No change. Now what am I going to do? He asked. That was strange. He had felt his mouth move when he spoke, but the mouth in the mirror didn't move. He brought his hands to his face. He could see his hands touching the face in the mirror, too. The cheek in the mirror was still all puffed out, but his own cheek felt soft and flat. He moved his tongue around inside his mouth, even though the tongue in the mirror was sticking out at him. He set the mirror on his desk. This is very interesting, he said aloud. Clearly the face shifts to whoever stares at it, he realized. He turned the mirror over, face down. He hadn't read about this in any of his psychiatry books. He slowly raised the mirror, caught a glimpse of the hideous face that was still there, then quickly lowered it back down on his desk. This discovery would make him famous. He even picked up the bust of Sigmund Freud, even more famous than you, he said to it. But would all that fame be worth it? What if someone else's face got stuck along the way? What would you do? He asked Dr. Freud. There is a reason it is called a bust. It was made of bronze and felt heavy in his hand. He flipped the mirror over and slammed Sigmund Freud down on top of it. The face shattered. Up in Mrs. Jewell's class, Kathy suddenly felt very dizzy and confused. She looked at the sentence she had just written. I can't read this, she exclaimed. It's backward. Let me see, said DJ, taking it from her. How did you do that? That's so cool. Warm, Kathy replied. Sounds like she's coming out of her little thing that Dr. Pickle did to her. Chapter 19, Pushdowns. Stephen lay on the playground surrounded by his classmates. He grunted as he pushed down on the blacktop with all his might. Nothing happened. You can do it, urged Mauricia. Push harder, Stephen, encouraged Joe. Stephen pushed harder. He grunted louder. Still nothing. Lewis, the yard teacher, blew his whistle. What's going on here, he asked as he made his way to Stephen. Stephen is trying to do a push down, said Damien. You mean a push up, corrected Kathy. Why do you have to be so opposite all the time, asked Damien. Stephen isn't pushing up, he's pushing down. So he can go up, said Myron. Kathy didn't mean to be opposite. She discovered she liked being nice and having friends. She just really thought they were called push-ups. How many has he done so far, asked Lewis. None, said Jason, but he's trying really hard. Lewis kneeled and then patted Stephen on the back. Keep at it, Stephen, he encouraged. Every day you'll get a little stronger. In a month, I bet you'll be able to do 5 pushdowns. A month, exclaimed Dee Dee. Stephen doesn't have a month. He has to bang the gong on Friday, exclaimed Ron. Lewis raised one eyebrow. His mustache twitched. I guess he really is the best principal ever, he muttered. What? Asked Mac. Never mind, said Lewis. Push hard, Stephen. The mallet is made of solid iron. Stephen grunted louder than ever. He didn't move. I can't do it, Lewis, he gasped. Talk to Mr. Kidswatter. Tell him to pick somebody else. Ooh, me, exclaimed Joy. Mr. Kidswatter is the smartest principal in the school, said Lewis. He must have had a very good reason for choosing you. Do you think it was to be mean? It might have been if Stephen's scrawny. I don't know. That's my prediction. I think he wants something bad to happen. Would you like to donate a toenail or maybe a fingernail, Mrs. Jules asked. Mr. Kidswatter examined his nails. No, I'm still using mine. I need a student to bang the gong on Friday. The next thing he knew, all the little brats had their arms in the air, and they were making strange noises like ooh, ooh, and me, me. You're the best principal ever, someone shouted. Those were magic words. He turned to see who had shouted them when suddenly he saw her, that awful girl who had given him that awful face. You, he boomed, pointing at Dana. Dana had a mosquito bite on her ankle, however, and at that moment she bent down to scratch it. Stephen sat behind Dana. Oh, back to the future. He lay on the blacktop, staring up at the awful cloud. I'm doomed, he moaned. Look, Stephen, I don't know what will happen on Friday, Lewis admitted. I don't know if you'll hit the gong or drop the mallet on your toe, But I know this. You have to try, or else you will regret it every day for the rest of your life. And whenever you hear a gong, your heart will fill with a terrible sadness. You really don't hear gongs all that often, Myron pointed out. I mean, except here. Even if you take $1 million, even if you make $1 million someday, Lewis continued, you could buy your own gong and hit it every day, all alone in your great big mansion, but it won't be the same. That is so sad, said Leslie. Paul sniffed back a tear. So what do you say, Stephen, asked Lewis. You want to give it one more try? Stephen wished Lewis hadn't mentioned dropping the mallet on his toe. Now that was all he could think about. He sighed and then rolled back over. He pushed as hard as he could. You can do it, Stephen, urged Allison. Push, said Jason. Up, encouraged Kathy. I mean down, I mean up, I mean... Now she was really confused. Stephen rose an inch off the ground, then collapsed. Everyone cheered. One more, urged Lewis, and then we'll go to the monkey bars and do some pull downs. All right, chapter 20. Inside the closet. Jason did it. He finished reading all 999 pages. He was so tired he didn't know how he made it up the stairs to Mrs. Jewell's class. He fell asleep somewhere around the 4th floor and awoke on the 28th. Did you finish your book yet? Allison asked him when he entered the classroom. She and Rondi giggled. Yup, said Jason. The girl's mouth dropped open. His book report only had to be 1 page, but Jason had written 10 pages. It was impossible to write only 1 page about a 999-page book. He wondered if anybody had ever written a book with more pages. Probably not. There was probably a law against writing a book with 1,000 pages or more. He brought the 10 pages and his 3 pictures to Mrs. Jewell's desk. I guess if somebody writes a book with 999 pages, it has to be really good, he said, or else nobody would ever read it. I don't know, Mrs. Jewell admitted. I've never read a book that long. Jason sleepily handed over all his papers. Where's your paperclip? Asked Mrs. Jewell. It got all bent in my backpack, he explained, too tired to think about what he was saying. Unbent, really. I guess the 999-page book was too heavy for it. He showed Mrs. Jewell his paperclip, now unbent into a crooked line. Here's a picture of it. Ah. Can you see that up there on top of the book? I can't get a good angle on it. Right there on top of the book. Mrs. Jewell put her hand to her mouth, horrified. You bent your paperclip, she gasped. Unbent, said Jason. Mrs. Jewell stood up. You better come with me, she exclaimed. She grabbed Jason by his ear and yanked him toward the door. Ow, he whimpered. Whispers could be heard from all around the room. He read a 999-page book, but he bent his paperclip. He wrote a 10-page book report, but he bent his paperclip. No, he unbent it. Everyone, stop talking now, ordered Mrs. Jewell. Do not leave your seats for any reason. She pulled Jason out of the room and slammed the classroom door behind her. She dragged him straight to the closet that wasn't there. Jason read the signs. Keep back. Do not open doors. Danger. Call the fire department if you smell something unusual. He sniffed. He didn't smell anything yet. Mrs. Jewell turned the dial on the padlock as she quietly said the combination to herself. 24, 17, 6. The lock opened. But you said it wasn't there, Jason pointed out. Of course it's there, said Mrs. Jewell. Hold this. She gave Jason one end of the heavy chain. He remained where he was as Mrs. Jewell took the other end and walked 4 times around the closet, unwrapping it. Then she took Jason's end from him and tossed the chain aside. It clanged against the floor. A steel bar held in place by 2 clamps still blocked the closet doors. The locks on the clamps had letters instead of numbers. Jason watched as Mrs. Jewell set one lock to ACBD and the other lock to BDBC. The clamp snapped open. I'm really sorry about the paperclip, Mrs. Jewell, said Jason. It's a little late for that now, don't you think, said his teacher. She lifted the steel bar and tossed it aside. A loud clank echoed down and up the stairs. Mrs. Jewell walked down several steps. Jason watched, amazed, as she slid open a secret compartment hidden in the 3rd step from the top. She removed 2 keys, one red and one green. Each closet door had a keyhole. One was green, the other red. Mrs. Jewell put the green key in the red hole and the red key in the green hole. I have to turn them toward each other at precisely the same time, she said, or else it will trigger the sirens and smoke screen. Jason held his breath as he watched her turn the keys. The doors clicked open. Ever since the closet first appeared, he and his friends had been trying to guess what was inside it. They imagined all kinds of horrible things, but what Jason saw now was worse than anything they ever imagined. The closet was empty. "Don't lock me in there, Mrs. Jules," he pleaded. "I didn't do it on purpose. The book was too heavy." He tried to remember all that he had seen and heard. Third step from the top, red key and green hole, 27, 6, 14, A, B, D, C. It was too much. It was slipping out of his brain faster than he could remember. "Call the fire department if you smell something unusual." "I don't want to become an unusual smell," he cried. "What are you blabbering about?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Why would I lock you in the closet?" She bent over. Jason looked again. The closet wasn't completely empty after all. There in the back corner was a small cardboard box. Mrs. Jules picked it up. The price tag stuck to its side read 89 cents. Mrs. Jules opened the top flap and removed a paperclip. "Now, don't tell anyone where you got this," she said as she handed it to him. "I won't," he promised. She put the box back in the closet, then shut and locked the doors, turning the color-coded keys in opposite directions. She returned the keys to their secret hiding place. She grunted as she lifted the steel bar, and then again when she set it in place. She snapped the clamp shut and spun the dials on the locks. Jason picked up one end of the chain and walked 4 times around the closet. Mrs. Jules secured the padlock. "I'm very proud of you, Jason, for finishing the whole book," she said. "I was kind of sorry when it ended," said Jason. Teacher and student returned to class. The closet for a box. So interesting. I love this book. Okay, I'll see you next time for chapter 21 on. Bye.